on the story, we are joined in our Pretoria studio by political analyst, Professor Lesiba Teffo. Prof, welcome to Your World and thank you so much for joining us. Now, let's start off with yesterday's decision, basically, and then today the President, attorneys withdrawing his application. What's your take on this, Prof?
Well, this is rather but sheer abuse of state institutions. I would hope that at least the court this time around will urge the president to pay out of his own personal coffers. Unless we do that, this tendency, this deplorable conduct will persist, whereby state officials, ministers and otherwise, disregard the rulings of the courts, and if they are to be taken up, then it would still the taxpayer who take care of those.
Prof, let's look at the legitimacy of this report. Some are saying the report was done haphazardly, and something I want to refer to from the report itself is that Executive Members Ethics Act, where the former public protector Thuli Madonsela mentioned it, saying that the reason why it had to be done in 30 days was because of that act. Let's look at the legitimacy based on the time frame in which this report was done and then subsequently released.
Look, I think she could only do so much within the time limits given to her. That's one. But it's that thou shalt not fail to recognize that this matter could have been concluded much earlier had people played ball, had people cooperated. You would recall the head of state. It was in March that he was informed and given the questions to respond to. Now to suggest belatedly that things were done haphazardly, while we should point the finger at the right people and we fail to do, I think it's a bit disingenuous on the part of those who make such statements.
Now, Prof, let's speak about accountability. What happens to the people that have been implicated in this report?
Well, they have the opportunity to take it on review. That's what the law provides for. And again, I say, indeed, the president doesn't have good advisors. You'd recall, on the 11th hour, he consulted with senior counsel Gauntlet, and then he withdrew the case, and then today again he withdraws on advice. He knows what the law provides. If you are unhappy, allow it to be published, and you can take it up on review. That's what is provided for in the law. Yet there are so many people who are getting enriched at the expense of the taxpayer purporting to be legal advisors. Those, I think, in the court of moral opinion, they will stand condemned, denounced and renounced for their thieving, perhaps some may argue, at the expense of the poor.
Now, Prof, another thing that was mentioned was the fact that some of the proof and some of the documents that the public protector received during this investigation will be handed over to the NPA as well as the Hawks for further investigation. Now, this statement about a further investigation, what does that mean to the credibility of the report? Does it hinder it in any way, or is it just the next step in terms of taking legal action against those who are implicated?
It is supposed to be the judge who's going to take the process forward, appointed by the Chief Justice of the Republic of South Africa. But again, lose not sight of the context and the time constraints. That if we talk that things were done haphazardly, who made it possible for the process to be done almost haphazardly in quotes, to the extent that the legitimacy and the credibility of the outcome could be questioned? Let's put the blame where it belongs. I think, right, to the extent possible, Thuli did what she did. Perhaps we'll give her credit later to say, had she not done within the constraints given what she did, imperfect as the report might be, perhaps we would not have had a report, or perhaps we would not even start at all to talk about the state capture in the manner we are doing today. So it might have been a preemptive strike on his part, on her part, as well as her advisors, that initiate the process and pass on the baton to the next person to take it forward.
Now, Prof, let's talk about the call for President Jacob Zuma to resign. Is this just another tactic to buy time? What exactly does this mean after the release of this report?
Yeah, the question is who's calling for his resignation? All right. Is the EFF, is people outside the ruling party? I attended, by the way, the Save South Africa in Durban at St. Albans Cathedral. I also at least visited the two marches by the DA as well as the EFF. And at least for once, across the color line, across the political spectrum, there's unanimity that we can no longer allow the looting and the undermining of state institutions intended to buttress our democracy. In unison, people are speaking. And I hear the same people say, and even one of the prayers, I heard a bishop say, we are also praying for the expeditious demise of the head of state. Unfortunately, of course, that statement is coming within a theological and a religious context. But that's the sentiment, that's the wish, that's the desire. And I thought, from what the Secretary General of the ruling party was saying yesterday, perhaps it's time, Mr. President, you dig deep inside yourself and listen to your conscience and perhaps fall on your sword.
Prof, perhaps just to stay with what you've just said now, let's look at some of this remedial action that was recommended by the Public Protector in more detail. The first one is obviously what we've just mentioned, which is a commission of inquiry that needs to be set up within 30 days, selected by a judge that is by the Justice Mogoeng. The next one is Treasury will be providing the funding for that commission. The commission will have the similar powers to the Public Protector during its investigations. The commission will also complete its duties and represent its findings to President Jacob Zuma within 6 months. Now, 6 months is quite a long time. Do you think anything will happen within that 6 months? Can we foresee maybe what you've just mentioned before with the president perhaps even stepping down in that 6 months? Or is it going to be really given a fair chance for this commission of inquiry to do its work? We get the report and the president submits it to Parliament within 14 days of receiving it after 6 months.
I have no doubt that it will be done, and it will be done within the time frame. That much I can attest to. But the real challenge is not for the president, it's for the ANC. The longer they keep the head of state in office, the more harm, the more damage it does to the soul of the party. And I'm one of those who say he keeps scoring so many own goals that at times I doubt that the bona fides of Julius Malema and Musi Maimane when they say he must step down. Why worry about a man who advances your cause? A man who helps you at least acquire as much votes as possible. A man who on almost on a daily basis is alienating, right, the membership of his own party and potential, right, voters who perhaps still are doubting Thomases that perhaps one day indeed, right, the ANC will turn a corner and give us a different leaf and they would be worthy of their vote. So yes, I think there might be those who come out, as I heard some voices today from the, shall I call them, the elders in the ruling party, who are saying so far and no further. And I think that chorus is going, and that chorus, as it gains ascendancy, it might have sufficient force to prevail on him. And I'm also hearing some within the cabinet, within the executive, who are saying we can no longer be quiet. Remember Martin Luther King, there comes a time in the affairs of men when silence is betrayal, when silence is acquiescence, when silence is collusion. Men and women within the ruling party perhaps have to take a side, either this way or that way, but there is no longer a fence to sit on.
Now, Prof, just to continue on that, Parliament then to review within 6 months the Executive Members Ethics Act to provide better guidance regarding integrity, including avoidance and management of conflict of interest. Now, then again, the President to ensure that the Executive Ethics Code is updated in line with the review of the Executive Members Ethics Act. This is after the Commission of Inquiry has delivered its review. What then going forward? Is this going to be enough?
You know, we don't even need all these processes, by the way. We don't need them. All we need is to look at section 173 of the Constitution, the values and the principles that must imbue, right, public officials. And public servant number 1 is the head of state. You have got Batupili principles. You have the principles that underpin and values that underpin the Freedom Charter. We have all those, right? But I heard even today people say, let everything else fall, but integrity must rise. And integrity cannot be taught, cannot be bought from Checkers or ShopRite. Integrity is a virtue inherent in all human beings. And if you allow yourself to be depraved, then you will be wanting to invite us and even the Constitutional Court and the judges to say, help me to be a man and a woman of integrity. We have the documents and we'll have those documents. But it's those elected officials who must be the embodiment and exude integrity in their conduct, comportment, and articulation or operations. And let them not corrupt, right, and undermine state institutions and those charged with the responsibility to ensure that the mandates of those institutions are carried out.
Now, Professor, just to
wrap up...
That's
integrity for me.
Perhaps just to wrap up, to look at something that we haven't looked at before, what this actually means for South Africa. Because there's been a public outcry today, we've seen it on social media everywhere. Some people are confused, for example, not everybody understands what this document means. What does this mean for South Africa going forward?
Well, the documents for me says there is some job to be done, and it will be done, and I have no doubt it will be acted upon. And I think the document also gives the ANC an opportunity to make a serious introspection that I have an inclination to say it might force them to say, Mr. President, so far and no further. But again, it is this day for me that I regard as a semi-Waterloo, where I've seen men and women across the color line, across the political spectrum, raising their hands, raising their voice in defense of the Constitution, in defense of the national flag of the Republic of South Africa. That gives me hope than I was 24 months ago. I'm more confident that South Africa is getting right itself on the right trajectory. It's a matter of time. We'll get the right leadership, men and women of integrity.
Prof, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
That was political analyst Professor Lesiba Teffo sharing his views on the state capture report. Time now for a short break. We'll be back with more.